I'd like to welcome Tim Purkiss from the University of London, who's going to talk about a subject which is very close to my heart and hopefully dispel some myths we have about how hard identity management is. Or confirmed, yeah.
Thank you. So my theme is why is IAM hard to do. My name is Tim Purkiss. I'm from the University of London. I'm a senior identity and access management analyst there. This is the building I work in. Some of you might be familiar with it. A great big tower in the middle of Bloomsbury, full of books and asbestos. And of course, being in IT, we're down in the basement, so we don't get all the nice views. I'll start off with a bit about the University of London itself, because this is a cause of some confusion to people. So the University of London is a federal university, a very kind of loose federation. We've got a number of member institutions. You'll be familiar with some of the names there that are our member institutions. From my point of view, identity management for the member institutions is easy. I don't have anything to do with them at all. They all run their own IT. All have their own IT organisations. There are a number of organisations within the Central University, though, that we do manage. School of Advanced Study has about 350 or so postgraduate students that we look after. The big one is the University of London International Programmes, now called the University of London Worldwide, but I didn't have the chance to get the new logo for that rename. And we've also got a small institute in Paris that does teaching for a range of undergraduate and postgraduate courses. The School of Advanced Studies is itself made up of a number of institutions. We've also got Senate House Library, which is open to students from all the member institutions. Student Central, which is the old University of London Union and provides services to students. We've got the usual range of departments, human resources, IT, property facilities, etc., etc. And we've got a number of professional services organisations. We've got the Careers Group, which provides careers advisors embedded in the member institutions. And we've got Co-Sector. Some of you may be familiar with Co-Sector. It contains the old University of London Computer Centre and recruitment and housing services for the university. So that's a kind of overview of the organisation. The main reason I've kind of started off with that is because it introduces the first of the challenges that I want to talk about. I want to talk about a number of challenges around identity and access management. Some of you may be familiar with. The first one is complexity. So we've got very complex organisations. Just to start off with some examples within my own institution. So the University of London Worldwide has very close relationships with the member institutions who put together all the courses that are run. So the thing about the University of London Worldwide is that it's entirely for distance learning students. So we've got students around the globe, about 60,000 students at any one time, all studying for University of London degrees, and those degrees are all put together by member institutions. So we've got obviously quite an interaction with the colleges. We've also got teaching institutions spread around the world where the actual teaching takes place for a lot of these students, about 400 dotted around the world. We've got the usual relationships with external funding bodies, etc. Co-Sector, for example, has customers around the sector, so we've got relationships with customers. Senate House Library, like I said, welcomes students from all the member institutions. The Institute in Paris has a very close working relationship with Queen Mary, including the fact that the Queen Mary hosts all the student records. So if I want to provision accounts for students going to the Institute in Paris, we need to get information out of Queen Mary and use that to provision our accounts. So we've got very complex relationships going on. We've also got that big building that we saw, which is full of asbestos and also full of tenants from other organisations who come and use the facilities there. So very complex organisations. We're not unique in that. Most IT organisations will have complex relationships with other organisations. But that's always going to be a challenge for identity management in terms of getting everybody to talk to one another and be able to pass identity and information around. I'm not going to obviously draw up all the links between things because we'd end up like that, and we want to avoid that. So let's come on to challenge number 2, perceptions. And primarily this is about perceptions about what IAM means. If we consider IAM to be a technical problem, then who's it going to sit with within the organisation? Is it a data problem? In which case, if it's data, who owns that data and where's that going to sit? This is entirely random data, by the way, if you're worried about me posting images of student numbers and student details. Ethical hacking is, it's all gone in there. So perceptions about what IAM is within the organisation probably then reflects on who's going to, actually be managing IAM within the organisation. So if it's just about user accounts, and that's what we're using IAM for, and that's all we're interested in, then it's probably an IT problem, and we can probably stick it down in the basement with the IT people. But actually, what if it's a security issue? And obviously, IAM goes hand in hand with security often. It's often talked about in the same breath. In which case, is it an IT problem? But what about also physical security, ID cards, badges, that kind of stuff? And physical building access, which is potentially also something to do with IAM, all related to IAM. If it's about people, is it an HR problem? Well, partially, but also obviously a lot of our people are students, so registry are going to have a big hold in that. So we've got sort of perceptions about what IAM should be doing for the organisation. And so let's think about what the definitions of IAM actually are. So if we just kind of go by the vague definitions of, or some of the definitions that you'll get in the various kind of things that you'll read, Gartner, et cetera, that you might read about what IAM is, and you carry those and you try and build something out from that, then you might come unstuck, because actually what we need to do is define what IAM means for our organisations rather than take somebody else's definitions of what they are. So if we start talking about, well, IAM itself, what do we mean by identity? Does that mean that we're going to be generating identities for people, or are we going to be using identities from other systems? What do we mean by access management? Is that just going to be access to computer systems, or is it going to be access to buildings? If we start talking about role-based access control and we put terror into the heart of people who have been thinking about role-based access control and think it's really difficult, well, if we actually define it within the organisation to mean, students and by programs and by departments, and actually we can do a fairly broad model of what role-based access control is, and we can actually benefit from that without getting mired into the complexity that role-based access control might actually bring. And ultimately, the reason I'm kind of talking about these different definitions is what we need to do from an IAM point of view is to try and set those in stone so that we've got working definitions for our organisation for what IAM means, rather than using somebody else's definitions. We can take the basic definitions and adapt them to what we actually want them to mean for us, and then work out from those. Challenge number 4, how are we going to actually organise IAM? So I was talking earlier about how we might perceive it, and do we perceive it to be an HR problem, or a registry problem, or an IT problem? But actually, when it comes down to the organisation of the data that we're going to be using for identity management, HR must own staff data. If we're going to be doing stuff with staff, if we're going to be, say, provisioning user accounts for staff or putting staff into groups, then HR need to have the understanding that they own that data, and staff will only appear in groups if HR tell us they should go in those groups. And similarly, registry should be telling us about students. And what about all the other people that we get coming into the organisation who aren't staff and aren't students? Now, I would say that should sit with departments. It shouldn't be an IT problem. It should be departments telling us who these visitors are, and not just telling us, but actually owning that data. So rather than them telling us when somebody starts and ends, they manage that data in some way. We provide them maybe with tools to do that, and so that they can control when their visitors are coming and going, and who they are, and what they should be able to do. And then there's how we actually organise it, IAM, considering that we're going to be providing tools for doing IAM. Where does that sit within the IT organisation? So we've talked about some of the sources for data that we might use for IAM, the registry systems, staff systems, etc., etc. So does ownership of IAM sit with whoever's managing those source systems? Probably not, because we've probably got several, and we want to actually have a combined view of identity. What about DBAs? Should they be looking after that data? They probably don't want to, because it's all about the data and not about running the database service. If we've got an integration team, that might be a logical kind of fit for identity, because we might want to use that data to push information around about people. We might have identity applications and identity platforms, and that might be the logical place for IAM to actually sit. We might have directory services that we're using for authentication, and so it may be logical that whoever runs AD, for example, should also run the IAM function. If we're using identity for identity cards and building access, then how does that sit with our other authentication services and IT services? And then also, because we're likely to be shifting identities out of the organization to cloud providers, then we've also got questions about how we're going to do that, and how we're going to tie that with the team that are running Office 365, for example. And then if we've got an identity platform in the organization, we may well have partnered up with a third party to actually provide identity services to us. And if we've done that, then what's the split between what we're doing in-house, what we're actually expecting our partners to do in terms of supporting identity. So challenge number 5 is around the data that we're going to use for identity management. And I've said before that we probably expect to have data coming from multiple sources: student systems, alumni systems, staff systems, and potentially a visitor system if we're trying to control visitors as well. And my view is that we bring that together into a concept of an identity store. You'll find identity stores talked about within IAM platforms and so on. My argument, I think, would be that we organise the data before we worry too much about the platform. We get all the data about our people organised in some way. That's a kind of business function before it's a technology problem. And once we've got the data in the identity store, we can use it for provisioning accounts, which is obviously one of the key functions of identity management. But we can also potentially use it for these other things: producing ID cards, managing building access, and also providing business intelligence management information kind of data out to other systems. Innovation. We heard a bit from other Tim about innovation. And I've kind of put this in. It's really just because when it comes to IAM, as with a lot of other technologies that we deal with, there's kind of two approaches to being able to benefit from new technology as it's coming in. So you can either go to vendors and buy the latest, greatest thing, and often you'll find that the latest innovations are expensive to buy, but you do then get the benefit of contracts and support that you can buy. And other innovations maybe are open source, coming out maybe from a research community, so potentially cheap to download and implement. But potentially, if you start building systems on that kind of less secure grounds without necessarily support contracts and that kind of thing, then you can become a little bit unstuck, and you can develop sort of technical debt within the organisation because you can't move beyond a piece of open source software, or maybe something that you've built in-house to try and stitch things together. It can become difficult. And one of the things that I find can be quite disappointing is that universities often have big IT research kind of organisations. You have computer science departments and things like that. And there's often quite a disconnect between getting information on new technologies and innovations out from the research side of universities into the kind of corporate IT kind of side that we're actually part of. So what about IAM projects, and actually bringing IAM projects, identity into IAM projects? Kind of two sides to this. I'll start off with the side that's actually implementing IAM through a project, because many organisations obviously try to do IAM projects. One approach is the big bang. You buy a platform, you do a multi-year project, to implement an IAM platform, and then typically with higher education, large-scale projects, you have to start scaling back. The budgets, projects overrun, the budgets get slashed, and you end up with something that's kind of half implemented. And IAM is obviously as prone to that as any other system, particularly if you go for one of the large or singing or dancing platforms. Another option might be that you pick off certain targeted parts of your IAM infrastructure for replacement, a kind of tactical approach, if you like. You can identify certain bits that aren't working or bits that are working but need enhancement and just tackle those. It's a perfectly valid approach. It's one of the things that you tend to find is that people say we need to do IAM, we need to do an IAM project because they think they need to do something new, whereas in fact they've already got an IAM ecosystem going on, they've already got things that are provisioning accounts and doing stuff. They're just not thinking about it as a service that they're providing at the moment. And actually if you start thinking about it as a service, then you can start identifying the bits that need improving. Another approach might be to get in a platform, a base platform to start off with, and then work out from that. So your project might be to bring in some new products in the IAM space and then start extending that service and building out from that service. And the other side of the kind of projects is actually trying to get people to listen and to understand about what IAM actually means. Because we might have a view of what IAM means. And this is kind of going back to some of those other challenges that I mentioned earlier about tackling the perceptions about IAM, defining what IAM actually will mean to the organization. Because if you can do that, then we can start getting, say, projects that are related to other services. We can get them to understand what IAM needs from them and what they need from IAM. So that when they're implementing their project, they don't suddenly come to almost implementing their solution and then realize that they haven't got any information about the people that are going to be using it, they don't know how they're going to authenticate, and they start creating user accounts within that application entirely separately. Whereas if obviously we engage with IAM earlier on in the project cycle, hopefully try and embed it in the project framework within the organization, then we can start seeing benefits from actually making the whole project smoother, making things tie together and not having to redo things. So the kind of things to think about when we're talking about IAM, we're trying to embed that culture within the IT organization and within the kind of business as a whole, is around how we're going to authenticate, how new services are going to authenticate, how we're going to do access management around it, so how we're going to know who should have access and who shouldn't, whether we're going to be using existing roles for that we might have already be provisioning, or whether we're going to do something new. And also getting data about people. So this is the big thing that's often, I think, missed with IAM. If you think about IAM just about provisioning the user accounts and populating groups, then you're potentially missing out the other benefits of actually how you're going to get data about people within the organization into those other systems. It might be as simple as just having a display name when somebody logs in that you can pick from their AD account, but it may be that you want to get actually more information. Maybe you need to have address information. You don't want people entering it twice. Can you use your identity system to take that data from a source system and populate it in an endpoint system? So getting the organization to think about what IAM will mean. And you can do that through various tools. You can do things like this and stand up and talk to people. You can create roadmaps and checklists that may be embedded into your project frameworks, like I was saying before. Hopefully everyone can have a party at the end when they've sorted everything out and they know the right people can be invited to the party because you know what role they had in the project. How are we doing? So I'm going to look a little bit at a solution that we've kind of been trying to work through. I've been trying to work through kind of mentally within the University of London, which is to consider how identity fits in as infrastructure. Obviously, it's an infrastructure conference, and this kind of came to mind primarily because I sit within the infrastructure team at the University of London, and because it's quite a small IT organisation, I'm a team of one, and I'm also involved in some of the other aspects around stitching bits of infrastructure together around integrations and around data management and that kind of stuff. I'm getting more and more involved with those. But from within the point of view of being in an infrastructure team. So you've got your typical kind of layers of infrastructure, a networking layer, a server, database kind of layer, be that on premises or in the cloud or some kind of hybrid. You've also got applications that might be on premise or cloud hosted. And you've got a range of services that are kind of necessary to stitch all those together. A term that I've started to use is software infrastructure soft infrastructure services. IM being one of them. So this is where we're talking about the people within the organisation, the staff, students, the alumni, whatever they are. We're also talking about things like privileged access management, about controlling who can do what at a more privileged level, potentially things like identity cards. But if we kind of identify a service that we can build around people and the data around people within the organisation, and then what they can, who they are and what they can do. Another one might be integration services, IM being an important part of integration, but being able to push data around between systems, potentially also between organisations. And the third one being around data management. So not the databases themselves, but actually corporate data, bringing that together into one place, being able to use that data more efficiently for management information, etc. An IAM infrastructure service might look something like this, or might contain these kind of components. We might have the IAM platform that we've got and any customizations, tools related to IAM and user and group management. We might have our authentication directories, authentication services, etc. And on the other hand, we might try and bring together all the kind of softer services around IAM, so things like technical expertise. So when somebody says, I want to do this, I want to have this new service, what do I need to know about identity? We've got people that know about that, can tell people about it. How to implement IAM within those new systems. You've got a new service, what groups do I need? Who knows about these groups? Where can I get that information? How do I attach a new service to authenticate against AD or Azure AD, for example? Expertise about data or about people. So again, if that's a key part of what IAM's about, the information about people, then who understands that best? Well, hopefully the IAM guys understand the data about people, where that's coming from, what it means, and how up to date it is. And then all the nice ITIL things, having a service owner, a service manager for IAM, so somebody you can go to and somebody who'll be responsible for it. And these people can provide advice and guidance. So what about what kind of benefits might there be for thinking about IAM and identity as part of the infrastructure or as an infrastructure service? Well, there's the usual kind of ITIL type things, contract management, so we know who our vendors are for IAM and we've got that information in one place. We can manage costs better if we understand it as a service. If we're planning on moving stuff to the cloud, then we can potentially know what's good and what's bad in terms of identity when we're shifting stuff into the cloud. But maybe some of the other more infrastructure type benefits that we can start looking at, capacity management. So if we know who the people are within the organization and we can get a view ahead of who the people are, for example, how many applicants we've got, can we use that to determine how much capacity we're going to need within the organization, which is more of a kind of classic infrastructure type question. Similarly, how much data we might need about people, or how many licenses we might need to provide services to students. If we've got a view of who the people are within the organisation, then we can hopefully plan that a bit better. If our estate is expanding or contracting, new buildings are coming in, or we're building a new campus out in the Olympic Park, which most of the London universities seem to be trying to do. Or if we've got we're trying to spread our reach around the globe, or maybe anticipate some kind of disaster happening to the globe. And then, of course, hopefully, we can see benefits from IAM for senior management. They can see, the benefits of automating some of these processes around IAM. You can see sort of how support can be more easily managed if there's less interaction with user accounts, for example, on the way through. We can hopefully start bringing innovation and plan ahead for innovations that are coming. And hopefully some of those challenges I was talking about earlier, we can avoid them becoming errors and things that are going to actually stop us and block us. And that's it. Do please get in touch if you want any other thoughts. We've got time for questions, or we can do that later.
We're up against the time, I'm afraid.
Okay.
Unless anyone's got any burning questions they want to ask right now.
Cool.
But please catch up with Tim a little bit later on.
Thank you very much.